All right, chapter 4.3 specifically starts talking more about eukaryotic cells, and it's honestly probably my favorite chapter, my favorite section of the chapter. So, what this chapter really talks about is something called the endosymbiotic theory. So, endo meaning into, symbiotic meaning a relationship that were both mutually benefit. And it's a theory about how these eukaryotic cells evolved. So, one concept I want to make sure we understand before going on is again, the cell has its own membrane. When I say membrane bound organelles, what that means is the mitochondria and chloroplasts that we're going to talk about also have their own membrane. So there's actually going to be two sets of membranes here, the cell membrane and the mitochondria and chloroplast own membrane. So what specifically happened to this or in this theory was we saw a lot of evidence about 50 years ago that showed that mitochondria and chloroplast billions of years ago were their own free-floating, free-living bacteria cells. What happened was a large cell engulfed them, took them in. You can see here, this is the process. They had this folded membrane, and they kind of made a membrane around the chloroplasts and the mitochondria that was living at the time. Now, at that time, they weren't mitochondria and chloroplasts. They were things called cyanobacteria and aerobic bacterium. But at that time, they were living by themselves, the bacteria and the mitochondria. Over years, something happened billions of years ago. Something happened where the cyanobacteria and the aerobic bacterium were engulfed by this prokaryotic cell. They found a mutualistic relationship. What that means is these bacteria cells that became the mitochondria and the chloroplasts found somewhere safe to live inside the prokaryotic cells. What the prokaryotic cell that later became the eukaryotic cell gained was these mitochondria, they produce a lot of ATP. They produce a lot of our energy currency. So that was really a benefit for the cell to keep around. These chloroplasts create a lot of sugars that the cell also is going to need. So this is that endosymbiotic theory that states that hey, both the mitochondria and chloroplast and the prokaryotic cell at the time gain something by these bacteria cells kind of almost infecting our cells with their presence. So this theory has a bunch of evidence, which we're going to get to next. So this theory is kind of out there. It doesn't sound like how it sounds like how can they think this? And I say in my class, extraordinary claims or require extraordinary evidence. And at first, this theory really wasn't accepted around the biological community. They thought, oh, it's just some evidence. But as more and more evidence started to gain, and more people started doing their research and researching into the originally hypothesis, they started finding even more and more evidence. And now it's widely accepted among the biological community. What happened is they found some evidence, and this is the evidence that we have finalized today. Membrane, the outer membrane resembles that of the eukaryotic cell, while the inner membrane resembles that of the prokaryotic cell. And that makes sense because, again, we're going to have this fold or this pouch that's going to create around that bacteria cell. So the outside cell of mitochondria is actually going to look a lot like the eukaryotic membrane, while the inside is going to look more prokaryotic. That's some evidence for this theory. In mitochondria, the mitochondria actually has its own DNA. So when a teacher tells you that 100% of the DNA in a eukaryotic cell is in the nucleus, they're kind of lying to you. Now, for the most part, they're right. 99.999% of the DNA in a eukaryotic cell is in the nucleus. But mitochondria actually have its own DNA. And the really cool thing is that DNA is circular. That should be like, oh, wait, that's not in the same fashion that the DNA in the nucleus is. Yeah, your DNA in the nucleus is linear. It's in like an X form. Bacteria cells have circular DNA. This is, again, more evidence that mitochondria and chloroplasts also have circular DNA, came from bacteria at some point. The ribosomes in these mitochondria and chloroplasts also resemble that of prokaryotic ribosomes rather than eukaryotic ribosomes. If you look structurally, there's a little bit of difference here between the prokaryotic and eukaryotic ribosomes. The mitochondria, which also have its own ribosomes, which is very rare for an organelle to have, look a lot more like prokaryotic ribosomes than the eukaryotic ribosomes. And lastly, the reproduction here. Mitochondria reproduce very similarly to asexual reproduction. What happens is the bacteria cells split and then just keep on splitting and splitting. Same for the mitochondria and the chloroplasts. They split in similar fashions to asexual reproduction. All of this evidence points to mitochondria and chloroplasts having lived outside a prokaryotic cell billions of years ago, but through the endosymbiotic theory, they became enclosed by a cell and now are organelles within our cells.